My guest today is Steve Milloy again. And Steve, what's happening with the transition, the Trump transition and climate and energy?
Well, Tom, thanks for having me. That's a really good question. So I was on the transition team 8 years ago in 2016, and that was more of a traditional sort of transition. We started in August and worked through the inauguration. This has been kind of different. This has been much closer to the vest. I don't really think there was any sort of transition until they won, and since then it's been. Um, kind of I don't want to say a family affair, but people that are down in Mar-a-Lago. So it's hard to say what's going to happen. I'm mostly interested in EPA and NOAA. So NOAA is part of the Department of Commerce. The pick for Department of Commerce is Howard Lutnick. I don't think he has any experience with NOAA or climate. So there's work to be done there. The pick for EPA has been Lee Zeldin, the former congressman from New York. Lee is very MAGA and wants to implement the president's agenda. And of course, important for our conversation is the president thinks climate is a hoax. So I'm looking forward to seeing how Lee Zeldin implements that at EPA.
So, can you say, are you personally involved at all in figuring out what's going to happen here?
I'm not personally involved at this point, but that who's to say what's going to happen in the future? It's just it. I think there's a lot to do. There's not enough people really involved at this point. They're trying to keep it very controlled. So, we'll see. Lee Zeldin doesn't have a lot of experience with, or really any experience with EPA or the environment. So, at some point, I'll probably get involved because he's going to need help.
So, do you have any insight whether they might actually do a red team, blue team thing this time around?
Well, I don't know that, you know, I'm hoping that we do something more serious. We don't really need a red team, blue team. What I'd like to see is EPA proposed to get rid of the endangerment finding. The endangerment finding is what the Obama EPA did in 2009 and concluded that carbon dioxide was a threat to, that plant food was a threat to public welfare, health and welfare. So I'd like to see EPA just propose to get rid of that. And, as far as red team, blue team, well, let's just do public comments. And then the Trump EPA can go through the comments and formulate its own decision and decide whether or not to keep or get rid of, the endangerment finding. Then we'll wind up in court. And as long as the Trump administration has, dotted the I's, crossed the T's, and not been arbitrary and capricious, which are applicable legal standards, then it'll be upheld, and we'll be free of the endangerment finding.
Do you think that having Musk around is going to make it more difficult to remove the EV mandates or whatever? Or do you think, since that those are luxury cars, that Tesla can still survive without any help from us?
Well, Tesla was doing great before the EV mandate. I don't think that that Musk benefited from the mandate. I think Trump campaigned on getting rid of the mandate. Musk seemed okay with that. I mean, of course, we'll have to see what happens. Who knows? But I think President Trump has committed to getting rid of the mandate. The EPA rule that is the mandate, the nutty fuel economy standards that the Biden EPA, basically dictated. I think that's going to go away. So the mandate will go away, and we'll see. I think Musk. He makes a cool car for people that like EVs, and it's a pricier thing, and so people that want those will buy them like they did before. And I really think that's the future. If you for EVs, and make a good car that people want and can afford, don't mandate it and don't subsidize it.
So there's just this video going around, undercover video in the last week or two about trying to spend all this IRA climate scam money before January 20th. Do you think they're going to succeed in just throwing money out, spending all this money before we get to January 20th, or can we claw some of that back, or what?
Well, I think they will succeed in spending as much as they can. What people didn't seem to pick up on during the election. I was trying to get this out, but there was 140 billion dollars of IRA money spent um, before the election. And about half of that money went to 5 battleground states. Coincidence? Well, I think not. But people weren't too interested in that, but it happened anyway. So yeah, that video said they were shoveling money out the door left and right. Um, and they've got, DOE, Department of Energy has $400 billion worth of lending authority under the Inflation Reduction Act. So yeah, I think they'll try to do as much as they can. Will the Trump administration be able to claw it back? Unless they're writing checks and people are getting checks cashed, which I think may take a little longer. I think all that a lot of that money can be clawed back, but the Biden administration is just doing whatever it can on the way out.
Do you think that Trump can cut the climate cultism out of a place like NOAA and keep the actual data collection that does have some value? Can you walk that line?
Well, I mean, I'm hoping that so NOAA's real value is weather forecasting. So I think the weather forecasting is important. I think the rest of it is just just who cares about the rest of it? Yeah, you can collect temperature data, I guess, if that really, to the extent that matters. But what I'm hoping that we can at least get a grip on, these websites like climate.gov and the Twitter handles, NOAA Climate, NASA Climate. Let's get rid of that stuff. I mean, these agencies have no business being in climate. There's nothing they can do about it. They don't really collect climate data. Weather data is useful to collect, sure. But when it gets spun into the climate hoax, I got to draw the line there.
So, how about the Paris Agreement? Can we just get out of it? Or I think you've mentioned elsewhere, maybe Trump could submit it to a vote as a treaty, and then we can finally see that the vote is going to go definitely against it.
Yeah. So just by way of background, so the Obama administration signed the Paris Climate Accord not as a treaty, but as an executive agreement. And in Trump 1, they pretended that, okay, it's an executive agreement, and there were provisions for getting out of the treaty, and that was getting out of the agreement, and that was just saying you're getting out, and then 3 years later confirming that. So Trump did that, but then of course, as soon as Biden was back was in office, he re-entered the Paris Climate Agreement. So President Trump could do the same thing again, and that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is just to submit it to the Senate. Treat it like a treaty and submit it to the Senate, where it require 2/3 vote for ratification, which of course it'll never get, and so it'll never be ratified. And then because it's been submitted to the Senate as a treaty, we're not subject to its terms. No court could say we're subject to its terms because it's an unratified treaty. As an executive agreement, it's conceivable that some court could cause problems by saying, well, you're still in the treaty. You've even acknowledged that because you've given notice. Although it's the notice is 3 years, you're still in it for those 3 years, so you're subject to it. So I would just like to see it go to the Senate, where we're out of it right away, and of course, the thing will just never be ratified.
So, from your perspective, it's a no-brainer to send it to the Senate, or why would Trump not send it to the Senate?
Well, I mean, it's strategy, and people have submitting it to the Senate. People might think, oh, Trump thinks it's a good idea, this should be ratified. Where it's really just a strategy to send it to the Senate. So if I was President Trump, what I would get out of it is the whole UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is the 1992 treaty that the elder George Bush signed, that got us in this whole mess. Let's just get out of that. I think the president could do that unilaterally and forget the whole thing. Let's leave it in the ash bin of leave climate in the ash bin of history where it belongs.
So, you think it's a possibility that we might send nobody to these COP meetings in the next 4 years?
Oh boy, would that be a
Possible?
tragedy?
Wouldn't that be great?
Well, if it were up to me, yeah, we wouldn't attend. But there's always, the problem is people like you and I, we have we are on, Trump is on the same wavelength as you and I are. And all the people who think that this is just a hoax. The problem is there's all these people in the middle that, don't know that it's a hoax, don't know why it's a hoax, think that we should participate somehow. So there's always people that, i- imagine there's a reason for participating. So you know what's going on. Who cares? Come on. We've got serious problems in the world. There's nothing that anybody can do about climate. There's nothing that anybody is doing about climate. No one can afford to do anything about climate, even if it were true that emissions had any effect on the planet. I mean, the whole thing, there's no better word for this than hoax. And Trump gets it, you get it, I get it, lots of others get it. But there's all these people in the middle, even, conservatives, Republicans, they don't get it.
So one thing I do love about your approach is you're willing to say hoax and scam over and over in your videos and on social media. I think that's wonderful. I think we need that type of straight talk. And you talk
Well,
about repetition is important, right? You've said that elsewhere. You can't just say it once. You have to say this stuff over and over for it to get through.
gotta say it every day. I mean, it's true. Repetition is the secret to success. Anyone that's taken a martial arts class, you do the same, lame drills every day because repetition is what ingrains it in you. And so you just have to say these things. And I gotta say, what inspired me to hoax was Trump. And I mean, there's been a lot of data out there, but when you crunch that data for yourself, and then there's this guy out there who's president of the United States who says hoax. That's what it is. It's it's a hoax. So yeah, I say it every day, and I know I probably, people get tired of hearing it, but what can you do? I mean, you've got to try to open people's eyes, remind them every day.
Yeah, I think you've said that you've been doing this for 30 plus years and you've debunked the same thing, every 6 months or something for 30 years. But you are reaching a new audience, right? Some of the people are seeing it for the very first time. They've never seen it before, I think.
Well, yeah, you get new followers every day, and for a lot of people, it's new. And I'm sorry if it's old for um, a lot of people. But I try to make it new. I mean, there's always new news articles. The Greens are really good at recycling these climate scares because they keep coming back. Today is desertification. The UN has decided that the world is going to dry up and blow away. Of course, the opposite is happening. So I don't really care. I mean, I'm going to look at media every day to see what people are talking about and give it my best shot. And yeah, it's going to be repetitive, and the same stories come back every 6 months, every year, every 5 years, every 10 years. But that's just, it's got to be done. Someone's got to do it. If you don't, if you think that, oh, I've already said this 100 times, well, it's gonna take root again. I mean, it's like weeds. You gotta pull it out by the root, and then you gotta keep pulling it out by the root because it's gonna come back.
So, what are some of the other keys to your success? Like you have a huge Twitter following or X following. Besides repetition, what else are you doing that is working so well?
Well, I mean, I try to keep it current. There's, the climate industrial complex, the climate industrial hoax is huge. Every media, every media outlet, every institution, every government agency, especially during the Biden years, they're just full of it. And so you've got to address it every day in every way. I know that there's lots of people out there that don't really care about the science. I mean, they're happy. And I don't mean this in a negative way, but you take someone like Alex Epstein's out there in a moral case for fossil fuels. That's true. That's true. No question about that. And that in itself is reason to oppose climate idiocy. But I'm more interested in the climate hoax because you gotta, people have to understand that this is all just a lie. It's all just made up. And, and the lying and hoax, it's not just limited to climate. It's throughout what people think of as environmental science, environmental policy. Climate is just the, most, um, you know, it is what people talk about the most.
I'm reading even recently, there's this huge effort by the UN maybe to regulate disinformation, that the stuff you and I are saying is bad for
Right.
democracy and we can't let us talk. Um, so far, X has been the place to go, right? X, and you have your own website. They can't regulate you there. But do you think in the next 4 years they're going to be able to crack down and allow less of our stuff to get out, or can they crack down on Musk and make climate
Well,
disinformation a crime or something?
well, I don't think anything's going to happen in the next 4 years. Donald Trump is going to be there. I, I can't see censorship getting any worse. I will say though, on one hand, um, we are allowed to say what we want on X, which is great, but at the same time, I just get this suspicion there's someone at X that is some shadow banning, censoring climate skeptics. I just, I have that feeling, have that experience, and we're allowed to speak, but I think that there's something going on there, and I'm not surprised because Elon Musk, as smart as he is, and I really don't understand this. I mean, he's curious enough to go from being a Biden voter to the biggest Trump supporter, but he has not made the leap into recognizing that climate is a hoax. He has some really naive beliefs. If you've seen any of his videos that he's done on climate, they're really not very sophisticated. He really hasn't thought about it a lot. There's a lot of magical thinking going on, based on what he's communicated.
So, and there is huge suppression of climate skepticism, I think, on Google, if you just Google stuff, or on YouTube itself. Yeah. Yeah. I just wanted to mention here that there was this incident. You're on my podcast 2 years ago, and you said the wrong thing, one sentence about the 2020 election. And the video stayed up for quite a while, and then it was deleted because that was misinformation because of that one sentence. And then later they changed the rules. I appealed it, and they said, "Oh, sorry," and they put it back up. So that was kind of interesting. That's the only time so far that I've had anything deleted off of YouTube itself.
Well, so can you imagine the process there, Tom? I mean, someone listened to the video just looking for some reason, to censor it. We talked about this earlier. I do these short videos now for my website and for YouTube. And if I do something on climate, YouTube slaps a label on it, you know, saying that, well, climate change is real and blah, 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 blah. I mean, it's unbelievable.
It really is. Yeah, I don't know if that's going to change, but you're not on Noster yet, right? Some people are saying that's going to be the place to go. It's something called Noster.
I've never heard of it.
Yeah.
First I've heard of it. I don't really see how anything replaces X. I know that all the defeated leftists are trying to move over to the blue sky. I think, not only is it smaller, it's really an inferior platform to X. So I think they'll all be back. I don't see blue sky going anywhere. X is where it's at.
So you
Like
did
it or
go
not.
over, you went to Blue Sky yourself, right? Though, and you posted some
I have an
stuff to
account.
see. Yeah.
I have an account there, but it's just X is much better. There are more people on X, and I'd rather spend my time educating more people than educating these leftists on Blue Sky that can't stand being on X and can't stand being questioned or challenged. I mean, it's just good riddance, I guess.
Yeah. So you have been on X a long time, and right now, to me, it looks like it's kind of the greatest time to be a climate skeptic on X because there's so many people now that are contributing and saying this is wrong, this is why. Do you agree with that? That now is a good time or the best time, maybe?
Well, I think, yeah, now is the best time, but I have a slightly different take on it. I think that, you know, we've been fighting a tough battle for the last almost 30 years on climate because there really hasn't been a lot of data. I mean, the climate started out as we think this is happening, and then all of a sudden it became we knew this was happening, and no one and you can't question it. There's this 97% consensus, and it rocketed to a 99% consensus, and then we got we were the first ones to be shadow banned and canceled. Right, the whole follow the science thing that started with climate, not COVID. So we were, I think, at the we were at the front of all this and experienced all these things before the rest of the public. And now, we are 36 years into climate, and things are really the data is breaking our way. Okay, the climate models have been wrong for the last 10 years. It as of beginning of 2023, between 2015 and 2023, those 8 years, 450, 500 billion tons of emissions, global cooling. And then the last 2 years, yeah, there's been this warming spike, but not explainable with emissions. And as per, even NASA climate chief Gavin Schmidt admits that he did it in Nature, he did it in the New York Times recently. No model predicted it. So they've been wrong for the last 10 years. I mean, how much more evidence do you need? They've been wrong about all the weather events. They can't predict anything. And, their whole world is emissions driven. They should, if emissions drove everything like they claim, they should be able to predict things, but they can't. They can't even predict the annual variation in atmospheric carbon dioxide. So they don't really understand the carbon cycle. So I think we are getting righter and righter and righter, and they're getting wronger and wronger and wronger. And so, yeah, this is a great time. And there are more people that are starting to recognize that. And of course, on X, you can, even though I think we are shadow banned, I mean, you can still get the points out. It's just, it's a little more challenging, but it works.
Do you have any comments on this anti-cow fart thing going on in the UK about how they want to feed the cattle this possibly dangerous thing to prevent bad weather? And people are pushing back hard. I'm loving that. Or what do you think?
Well, yeah, no, well, I've got to go back to first principles. I mean, methane, as Anthony Watts pointed a long time ago, and recently Will Happer did an analysis to verify that methane is irrelevant as a greenhouse gas. It's colorless, odorless, and it has no effect on climate. So who cares? I mean, the notion that we're going to that they're going to put masks or technology or change feeds or anything with cats is just crazy. There's just, but in the UK, they're totally insane about climate. Even conservatives over there, they're like, well, we're against net zero, or we don't like the way you're getting to net zero, but something needs to be done. And I just, I've given up on those people, even our allies in the UK, because they will not address the problem, which is that the science is a hoax. There's no science there.
Do you see a lot of this crazy stuff still coming down from on high from the WEF or whatever from BlackRock, that there's this drastic plan or grand plan to control us, and they're pushing the climate scam for this? Or is it more of individuals like Bill Gates more acting as an individual to push this stuff to make money?
I think it's a group effort. I don't see these people going away. I mean, how do you walk back any of this? I mean, just from an individual standpoint, how does Bill Gates walk this back, or Al Gore, or Larry Fink at BlackRock? I mean, the things they've said, and the institutions, how do they walk it back? It's impossible. So they can only move forward. And there's people it's their political agenda, so they want to move forward. People that have sort of fallen into it because they're just going along with the crowd. How do they walk it back? And I don't think they can. So I think it's going to be with us for a very long time, if not forever. And we just have to keep pushing. I mean, maybe one day it'll just be so obvious to everyone that everybody just moves on. But I don't know when that's going to happen.
I mean, do you think that there really is some sort of a war on farmers, just to try to blame bad weather on farmers so that BlackRock can take their land, anything like that?
I think that there are a lot of people that thinks that there needs to be one world government. There need to be fewer people, and they recognize that, I mean, they need to, their best hope is to gradually gain control of everything. They tried the big power grab with COVID, and they were beaten back, not after they hadn't accomplished a lot for their agenda, but they were beaten back, and now we have President Trump. But I don't think they're going away. It's their agenda. They're very patient people. They're very I hate to say smart, or they're clever. And I think they're going to be an ongoing problem. I mean, there are lifelong totalitarians amongst us. They call it progressivism, and they're just progressing us to totalitarianism. But I don't think they're going away.
So I think you've said elsewhere that maybe nobody in the world is more well versed in EPA overreach than you are, since you've been concentrated on it for decades. Why are they fighting nuclear power so hard?
Well, that's really a great question, and well, I have to say at the beginning, I have this amazing story at the top of my website, junkscience.com. It's a video series. It's 11 hours. Sounds like a lot. It's 22 half-hour or less episodes. If you binge watch anything, binge watch that, because that will just blow your mind how science went from a theory about how evolution occurred into the most junk science regulation of chemicals and nuclear power and radiation. Yeah, so I mean, the basic problem is that for political reasons in the 1950s, the government decided that any exposure to radiation increased cancer risk. There was no data to support that. Data was actually to the opposite. That was in the 1950s. 1970, when EPA came along, EPA just incorporated that into all radiation and chemical risk assessment. So if EPA concludes that if some chemical, if some rat is poisoned by a chemical and the rat develops tumor, then EPA assumes that the chemical is carcinogenic and that any exposure increases cancer risk. Of course, it's not true. There's no science behind that, but that's EPA's policy. And just today, the Biden administration announced that two, industrial chemicals, one in dry cleaning, or tetrachloroethylene, also known as PERC, and another important industrial solvent, TCE, trichloroethylene, they're going to ban them. EPA has been trying to ban them for 40 years now. And finally, the Biden administration is going to do it. It's all based on this junk science notion that any exposure to chemicals or radiation increases cancer risk. There's a guy, Ed Calabrese. If you watch the videos, you'll see his work. He has done painstaking work. I'm really impressed. If anybody deserves a Nobel Prize, it is Ed Calabrese of the University of Massachusetts. He has done, he's like the second most published scientist in our lifetime. He does incredible work exposing the whole scam on the development of the so-called linear no threshold model. It's really impressive stuff. If we got rid of the linear no threshold model, we would be able to have more nuclear power. We would be able to have these small modular reactors. People would not be so freaked out about radiation.
Yeah, you mentioned his name, Ed Calabrese, last time, a couple of years ago, and you got me in contact with him. He did a podcast with me, and he sent me a number of his papers. I watched a lot of that 11 hours that you talked about. I did not watch all of it, but it's an amazing story. This whole idea that if a lot of radiation is bad for you, then it's all linear, and even a little radiation is bad for you. But you believe, as Ed does, right, that there's a J curve, and it may well be that a small amount of radiation is better for you than no radiation? Possible?
Yeah, well, it's how vaccines work. Okay, I mean, the way vaccines work, I'm not talking about COVID vaccines, okay, it's just normal, right? I mean, actual vaccines. You get a little bit of exposure to, the pathogen, and then your body, stimulates your body to develop an immune response to it. And it's the same way with radiation. A little bit of radiation exposure, and a little bit can be a lot actually, stimulates your immune system. I mean, cancer is a disease of aging. Your DNA repair mechanism, capability of DNA repair basically falls apart. Uh, but a little bit of radiation, a little bit of chemical exposure can actually stimulate your DNA repair and reduce your risk. So that's pretty well established in the literature. But if you don't, even if you don't want to believe that it actually reduces your risk of cancer, just believe that it doesn't have any effect at all. Okay, and we can still have all the nuclear power that we want and need.
I think Ed exposed this story of there was this idea that if we gave enormous amount of radiation, exposed bugs to a tremendous amount of radiation, they would get mutations, but they just kept cranking it up and they could not make it happen in the real world. Does that sound right?
Well, yeah. So the original the way this whole thing started was about 100 years ago. Uh, people had bought into evolution, and they wondered, like, well, what makes evolution happen? And so the idea was that background radiation, just cosmic rays coming from space, and radiation from the soils, that amount of radiation called background radiation, everyone's exposed to it, you can't avoid it. That was the driver of genetic mutations that caused evolution. And well, of course, there was evolution takes such a long time. It was obvious that you were not going to be able to show that with background radiation levels. So scientists started these experiments where they would take fruit flies, which um, reproduce pretty quickly, and bombard them with X-rays, just incredible amounts of radiation, like millions of times what humans are exposed to. And at first they thought that, the changes they saw were caused by the radiation. And they thought that these were mutational changes, point mutations in genes. As it turned out, they weren't point mutations in genes. They were just blowing holes through genes with radiation. Radiation was so strong. And it didn't, but they didn't care. So, you watch the video series, you'll see this turned into how we regulate nuclear power plants, just blowing holes in chromosomes.
So I just looked up another story today that you had mentioned. I think it was from 2001 about there was a certain threshold of radiation for Yucca Mountain. And then maybe you went in and measured at the Capitol building near a statue. And there was like 65 times that level of radiation just in the Capitol building. Does that sound right?
Yeah, yeah. So, well, so Yucca Mountain was this, well, it's this place in the Nevada desert, 100 miles from Las Vegas. It's in basically the middle of nowhere, and they were for the last 40 years they've had this idea of taking spent nuclear fuel from nuclear power plants and burying it at Yucca Mountain a mile underground in a retrievable storage format, so they could bring the fuel back up if they wanted to reprocess it or something like that. And of course, all the new anti-nuclear people didn't want that. They don't want nuclear power, so they certainly don't want you to be able to store waste. And so when I was first got involved in this, EPA was thinking of forcing the Department of Energy to guarantee that the Yucca Mountain storage site would be safe for 10,000 years. And then EPA decided, well, 10,000 years is not, 10,000 years is twice the length of recorded human history, right? And EPA decided arbitrarily that 10,000 years wasn't enough. It must be 1,000,000 years. So the Department of Energy had to guarantee the safety of Yucca Mountain for 1,000,000 years. So this is all ridiculous. We're talking about ridiculously low exposure levels. So, before 9/11, I was able to get into the Capitol building with the help of some Senate staff. And so I got in there with a Geiger counter. I went into the rotunda where they have all these, there's all this marble and granite in the rotunda, and all these statues. And I went up to one of the statues, I think it was the Roger Williams statue, and measured the amount of radiation coming off the statue. And went back to my office and calculated, found out that the radiation coming off the Roger Williams statue was like 65 times greater than the amount of radiation at the fence line of the nuclear power plant, right? But nobody is shutting down the Capitol because there's a cancer risk.
Fantastic.
Then the architect of the Capitol. So I, released my findings, and this, freaked out people, and even the architect of the Capitol, got involved and said, "Oh no, there's, the radiation is safe." Well, okay, so if the radiation is safe, then what about, nuclear power plants? I mean, they're pretty safe then too, and then Yucca Mountain, that's pretty safe as well.
So on a separate note, do you have any thoughts on the safety of glyphosate? What do you think?
Glyphosate, yeah.
Yeah.
So glyphosate, that's Roundup.
Yeah.
And, there's, of course, because it's so popular, environmentalists hate it, and they've scared all these people about Roundup. And there have been jury verdicts where, people who have gotten cancer have been able to convince a jury that their cancer is worth billions of dollars. And all this stuff is insane, even if it were true. But it's not true. I mean, glyphosate is probably the most studied chemical. The way it works is that it inhibits plant growth, and it's not known to be carcinogenic. It doesn't mutate genes. No one is exposed to glyphosate in an amount that would cause cancer. Let's just step back to the to radiation for a second. So, we know radiation increases cancer risk mainly because of the atomic bomb survivors of the but it's not what people think. Of the 135,000 or so atomic bomb survivors that have been tracked in the Radiation Effects Research Foundation database, there have been about 1,000 extra cancers among those people. The background rate of cancer is somewhere between 30 to 40% for, all adults. All in a population of adults, 30-40% will get cancer over a lifetime. So in that population of 135,000, you'd expect to see maybe 45,000 cancers. So there were an extra 1,000 cancers caused by the atomic bomb explosion. Okay. Now, I don't care how you use Roundup. There is no way that spraying Roundup is equivalent to an atomic bomb explosion. So there's no way that Roundup causes cancer.
Do you have any thoughts on any danger of exposure to artificial light? That does blue lights or lights coming off of all of our screens? Any danger from that or not?
I haven't seen anything. I mean, people have all sorts of ideas. I mean, if looking at a screen makes you uncomfortable, I don't know, change the lighting or don't do it. I don't know, but people just put these ideas out there, and people that don't know how to evaluate things or just believe everything they hear in the media, they just get scared. I don't know if there's something there. Please show me a study, and okay, maybe I'll believe you. I mean, this is like there with the internet. I mean, scaring people is just it's an industry now. There's all sorts of nutty ideas. We're entering into a whole new nuttiness about food. There's this food scare coming with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and it's amusing to me because I've worked on food scares from since the 1990s, and they always came from the left. And now Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has joined the MAGA movement, so now they're coming from the right. I'm just like, oh my God.
Yeah, I heard a lot of that stuff about the evils of processed food, but then I heard you talking on a video about actual data, right? About studying people who ate processed food, and the data was not that impressive, was it?
Well, it's a really interesting topic. So, if you want to say, I see this on TV all the time. You get these, in-house physicians, and they're talking about how, this preservative or this food coloring or this food additive causes cancer. And they talk about it like, everybody knows this, and it's a fait accompli, and there's a load of science behind it. And of course, there's not. There's just simply not. I've done videos on some of this, like red dye number 3, and I went back and looked at all the science, and Based on the available science and the studies they talk about, California has banned red number 3 as a carcinogen, causing cancer. But I looked at, there's actually no study that shows that, not even an animal study where cancer was reported. There was one study of rats where the highest dose, the rats got these non-cancerous tumors. And that dose was equivalent to a human, a child, eating 184,000 red jelly beans a day. Okay, it's clearly crazy, right? And you can go through all these dyes and all the food additives. There's really no science there, but people just have this. It used to be the left that was afraid of chemicals. Now it's the right. People say, "Oh, there are chemicals in my food." Well, everything is chemicals. Our body is made up of chemicals, and with chemicals, it's the dose that makes the poison. And anything, water can be dangerous, sugar can be salt, anything, chemicals can be dangerous, but it's all a matter of dose. And nobody seems to want to realize. They just want the collateral consequence of all this is that there's this war against big food. The message out there is that the food industry is trying to kill us. Now, how much sense does that make? Why would they want to do that? I mean, would they want to subject themselves to the same sort of multi-billion-dollar liability that Bayer has for glyphosate? No. I mean, don't they want to keep selling you product? Yes. Also, if this movement results in no processed foods or more expensive processed foods, who does that hurt? Well, that hurts the vast majority of people, not in the 1%. I mean, most of the people I hear talking about this, with the food scare, they're all these elites who can have their housekeepers go out to the market, to Whole Foods, and buy the best looking fruits and vegetables. But most people can't live that way. It's just, the whole thing is just not realistic. It's not based in science. It's not based in common sense. It's and the source of it, of course, is Robert F. Kennedy, who, a broken clock is right twice a day. Robert F. Kennedy has been right once in his life, and it was a big right. He was right about COVID and the vaccines. And, all credit in the world for him for that, but he's wrong about everything else. I mean, he's a climate bedwetter. He's, anti-chemical. He's been an extreme environmentalist his whole career, but he's right on COVID. So, now that he's been nominated to be Secretary of HHS, I'm all for that. I would like him to go into HHS and do a final accounting on COVID. What happened? We should know the truth, the science, the policy, all that stuff. What did Fauci do? What did Bergs do? How did they mislead Trump and destroy our, we still have severe impacts from the COVID policies, not COVID, but the COVID policy. I still see people in the stores who, unfortunately their brains have been damaged, and they're still wearing masks. These surgical masks don't matter. It's crazy. So I want him to go in and fix that. Do I want him to touch the food supply? No.
I'm curious, is there any chemical or food that you really think is dangerous for us? Or do you think like margarine versus butter, they're both the same in terms of health? Anything like that?
Well, this is really something. We were all scared off eggs and butter, in the 1970s. That's when those scares started, and they've turned out not to be true. They don't make any, it's all just food. It goes into your stomach where it is subjected to, acids. It's destroyed into building blocks, and useful building blocks are used, and toxic ones are, your liver gets rid of them. People are afraid of microplastics, forever chemicals. They really don't understand any of these things. They just think, when they think chemical, they think poison for some reason. And as I mentioned earlier, it's the dose that makes the poison. And no one really understands these things. I don't often respond to people on Twitter or X, because usually they're anonymous people, and I just don't get involved in that. But I had to the other day. Someone pointed out, I made some comment about food, and they said, well, everyone knows that, smoking and drinking are bad for you. And well, I mean, once again, it's the dose that makes the poison. Winston Churchill, let's take him for an example. The dude smoked 20 cigars a day, drank like a fish all day, ate everything in sight, got no exercise, led a stressful life, lived to be 91. Okay. Which was 25 years beyond his life expectancy. Incredible. Then you can compare him to, say, Linda McCartney, who was this, ultra wealthy, Paul McCartney's wife, first wife, ultra wealthy vegetarian, died of breast cancer at age, 47 or something like that, way below 33 years below her life. How do you explain that? It's got probably more to do with genetics than what they ate. Churchill consumed all these toxics and survived. I just put a story up last week. The oldest living man was this 112-year-old veteran who claimed to smoke 12 cigars a day and drink whiskey. Okay. Health is more complicated than people are willing to admit. Now, just one final comment on this. On this, all these scares are driven by people who have lost a lot of weight and feel better from losing weight, and that's great. I'm glad that they have lost weight. But just because, you allowed yourself to weigh 200 pounds in 8th grade, or your parents allowed you to weigh 200 pounds in 8th grade, or that's what your genes did, doesn't mean that that's everybody else's situation. And so, people need to figure these things out for themselves. Maybe we need better education in school. People need to learn about different body types and different foods and how they work. And, just, you can't just go with the flow. Don't just believe everything you hear on TV, even if it is Fox News about foods.
All right, so totally switching gears again. Do you have any thoughts on whether Trump can revive the economy enough so that we can cut down on this $36 trillion debt? Do you think that can happen, or what's your level of hope there?
Well, that's a pretty big task, right? I think that, we can grow more. We need more people. We need more economic growth. We need to control government. I mean, government spending needs to be cut. We cannot go fight every war and spend trillions of dollars doing it. We have made people too dependent on the government. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, these all sound like great ideas, but, maybe the money could be spent in other ways. I mean, we have made it so expensive that young people cannot buy homes, right? When I was young, I had the opportunity to buy a home, to have a car, and I get the sense that most young people don't. It's not within their reach anymore. Then having children, is even another leap. I mean, it's just, and so we need to make life more affordable for people. And having the government with this huge budget, they have. Yeah, I mean, we've survived so far, but we have this huge debt out there, and we're spending $1 trillion a year servicing that debt. It just doesn't really make any sense. What are we getting from it? There's a lot of areas of life where I think we could cut. I'm hoping that Doge can shed some light on that, and I'm hoping that they can do it in such a way that they develop momentum for change in the 2026 election, so Republicans can hold on to the House and maybe get some more fiscal-minded people in there and get government spending under control. It's going to take a long time to pay down that debt, but we got to stop incurring it, right? That's the first step.
Do you think that we can start exporting LNG, liquefied natural gas, to Europe? You think that can be a thing that happens and be good for our economy?
Yeah, I think that we need to take advantage of the climate hoax while we can. I mean, as long as the rest of the world is believing that, well, we gotta, we can, if we're going to use fossil fuels, we can only use natural gas versus coal. Okay, well, what we should do at home is burn coal for electricity and take all that wonderful natural gas and export it to these countries that'll pay 6 times more for it in Asia and Europe. It seems like a no-brainer to me. Coal is cheap, it's domestic. It was a great industry. People that lived in communities where there's really nothing else to do could work in coal mines and make good, good wage. They could buy homes, send their kids to college, have a good life. We should do that. And, instead of heating all this natural gas here where the prices are artificially deflated. Sometimes they go negative in West Texas, right? And it's, even the Marcellus Shale natural gas is kind of bottled up because you can't pipeline it north, and we have to import Russian gas. This is all insane. Let's take our natural gas and export it to crazy people like Japan, China, Europe, where they just pay outrageous prices for it.
Do you think we can get some pipelines built during this 4-year period?
Well, I think the Trump administration will green light pipelines as they come up. The problem though is going to be the activists who will forum shop to find judges to block pipelines. So, I mean, that's going to be a problem that we have. But it won't be a problem with the government. I mean, I think the Trump administration will greenlight things.
All right, but Keystone XL is not dead forever, or is it?
Well, I don't think there's anybody who wants to build it. I mean, the last I saw, TransCanada or TC Energy, whatever they're called now, they said that they were done with it. And there are plenty of other pipelines. There's oil and gas flowing. If somebody wants to build it, I think the Trump administration will greenlight it. A lot of that pipeline is already built. It really wasn't that much that wasn't built.
All right, we're almost out of time, but I have one unrelated question about, I think there was an incident where Fauci thought he got West Nile virus because of global warming. Was that?
Yeah, I know. He got West Nile virus in his backyard, and he blamed global warming, and because the climate hoax has it that things are warming up, and so areas that weren't previously hospitable to mosquitoes are now hospitable to mosquitoes. And of course, nothing could be further from the truth. Mosquitoes are endemic to North America. Mosquitoes are endemic as far north as Canada, where it's really pretty cold. Washington was a malarial swamp, and it was made made to be not a malarial swamp through the use of insecticides like DDT. Well, we don't, of course, use insecticides anymore because, well, that's a different story at Junk Science. So now mosquitoes are coming back. West Nile virus, I guess, first appeared about 20 years ago. And so now it's spreading in more places. And that Fauci doesn't know that just shows you what an idiot he was on COVID.
Okay. Any other points you'd like to make before we finish this one up?
I'm talked out.
All right. Steve Milloy, thanks a lot. A very interesting conversation. I appreciate you taking the time.
All right, Tom. Thank you.
Talk to you later. Goodbye.